Welcome back, everybody. Very good discussion. The first part, I'd like to thank our panelists and our moderator, Monica, as well. Up next is our second showing of our videos that we made. It's called Reuse, Reuse, Ruminate. And there's been a lot of ask about how the beef industry can help with food waste. And this video really highlights what it is that the beef industry does. Our moderator actually is Tyler McCann. Tyler is a managing director of the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, and he'll lead our second panel in discussion on the themes of food waste and loss, cattle's role in upcycling, and on food security. Tyler's career in agri-food policy includes working for federal ministers, farm groups, industry associations, and agri-food business. He also farms with his family in Western Quebec. It's great to have you here, Tyler. Take it away.
Thank you, Nathan. And I think most of us have seen the Guardian of the Grasslands video several times, but this video on food loss and waste was a new one for me, and I thought it was really good. And again, tells a really complex story in a really easy to understand way. And so now we're going to dive into this complex topic, looking at it from a couple of different perspectives. We're going to start with Sophie Beecher. Sophie is the Director General of the Sustainable Development Policy Directorate at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Her team works on important policies that touch on food systems and food system sustainability, including the development of the Sustainable Ag Strategy and the implementation of the food policy. And Sophie, I was wondering if you could start by really touching on your experience around this and how things like food loss and waste fit into your work on the Sustainable Ag Strategy.
Yes, hi, thank you. Yes, so indeed, my portfolio at the Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food does include both sustainable agriculture and the food policy. And so this is where the two subjects meet in a way. We do find that there's a lot of overlap or linkages between the two sides of our work. And certainly sometimes it's a bit artificial to separate them. It's almost academic, right? To say that we're dealing with sustainable agriculture on this side and then food policy and food loss and waste on that side. Essentially, they are interrelated. So for administrative reasons or just division of labor, we are advancing our priorities on sustainable ag in one context, but we're also simultaneously pushing our objectives under the food policy. And we hope that the two projects are going to be renewed at the same time and will work together. And I look forward to sort of providing remarks today that sort of show the interrelationship between the two sides of my job. Food loss and waste is particularly special because it squarely touches upon social, economic, and environmental almost in equal measures. And in that way, it's sort of the perfect set of solutions to a lot of our problems.
And thank you, Sophie. And again, I think it builds on this theme of the cattle sector as a solution provider to a lot of the challenges that are there. We'll go to our next panelist. Jack Chafe is a board member for the Canadian Cattle Association and current president of Beef Farmers of Ontario. Jack and his family run a feedlot in Southern Ontario. He is the fourth generation on the family farm, and two of his sons who are now involved full-time are the fifth. They were one of the original feedlots to participate in the Ontario Corn-Fed Beef Quality Assurance Program as one of the pilot feedlots for the CRSB. Jack, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do and your role in the supply chain?
Yeah, so we run a feedlot here in southwestern Ontario. And I guess our part as a feedlot operator is the upcycling of the whole food waste or food loss equation. And great video there, and it just demonstrated some of the points and techniques that we can do as feedlot operators as the upcyclers. And I'll give you a few examples. And I kind of break down the food loss into three different areas there, whether it's at harvest or whether it's through the processing, which was demonstrating, or the packaging. And one example here in Ontario, we have a production of corn syrup, And before that product is made, the corn has to be screened so it's perfectly clean of weed seeds and fines. So there's a byproduct that comes out of there, basically called corn screenings, which can be added back into the feed ration, fairly high energy, decent protein sample. And then after that, after the corn syrup is actually made, there's another product that comes out of there, which is called corn gluten, which is also can be added back into the feed ration. And basically, beef cattle can take food waste or the food production byproducts and convert them into high quality protein source. So I see the feedlot operation being a solution to food waste problems. So I'll leave it at that, Tyler, for now.
Great, thank you, Jack. And the cattle do this natural process to do that conversion, but our understanding of it relies on quite a bit of science. And someone that's doing part of that science work is Dr. Stephanie Terry. She's with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada at their Lethbridge Research and Development Center. Her research program includes work on strategies that improve the environmental performance of beef cattle production through dietary mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions, improving the utilization of byproducts and alternative feed sources, and enhancing the performance efficiency of beef cattle. Dr. Terry, could you tell us a little bit about your role as a research scientist, the work that it does, and the role that it plays in this important topic?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me today on this panel. So as mentioned, I am a ruminant systems scientist, and I really do focus on the environmental sustainability of the beef cattle system, as well as other ruminant systems. I would say that I'm newer to looking at the research on how cattle can contribute to the food loss and food waste problem. But as that video demonstrated, cattle already play a really active role in ensuring the sustainability of all other sectors, like, for example, beer making that was mentioned in that video, as well as other byproducts that are routinely fed into beef cattle diets, both on the pasture and feedlot basis. So I think, in terms of the breaking it up into food loss and food waste, I think, it's really interesting how the beef industry is not even just trying to improve their own metrics of how much they waste within their own system, but also looking how they contribute to food waste from all food that is produced within Canada. So interested to be involved in today's discussion. Thank you, Tyler.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. And again, encourage those that are with us on the participants to use the chat to submit some questions. Maybe I'd like to start with kind of a general question about food loss and waste for all of the panelists. I think there's when you think about sustainability today, circular systems has become quite an important topic. It's probably a very new term for agriculture, but Jack has talked about it. The video demonstrates that the circularity of building systems that reuse and recycle is something that the cattle sector has been doing for quite some time. So I was wondering, Jack, how do you see this playing out? Do we need to do a better job of understanding in these complex systems the important contributions that we're all already making?
I think we've got a good handle on it, but moving forward, there's definitely more things we can do. And I think the linkage here, even with the panelists, a lot of this, the key is research. And how much of these products can we put in our rations? How do they affect the performance of the cattle? Does it affect them equality? I think one of the keys is research, and moving forward, I've always said this in our operation, research has likely played a bigger part of our operation than anything moving the industry forward. And in those joint relationships between associations, and I'll use an example, the corn producers here in Ontario, when the ethanol mandate was first introduced, and there was going to be more production of the byproduct corn distillers. The two groups, the cattle associations and the corn association, work hand in hand and making sure that that product was being used at the feedlot level. So I'll turn it back to you, Tyler. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. And so go to Stephanie to build on that comment around collaboration and working together. Again, Jack talked about how important research is to his work as a producer, talked about the partnerships that they have with the corn producers. Again, I think that the CCA puts a lot of focus on partnerships with research scientists like yourselves. Can you speak to how that partnership and collaboration plays into the work that you do as a research scientist?
It's essential. You know, both Ryan and Bob are fantastic examples of two producers, as well as Jack here, that are working on the ground. That, you know, it's really nice to see that research and on the ground implementation of that research is already in play. I think it's really interesting. I have a project that's funded a collaboration between the Beef Cattle Research Council and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada to work on this issue of food waste, not just from what we're already doing. So that's, and that was kind of the first start of your question, is do we need to profile how much food loss and waste we're currently putting into the beef system? And I think that is actually really important. And that involves talking to individual producers, as well as working with other organizations. So I have to mention Loop Resources. They're a fantastic business, and they manage surplus food across all of Canada. And they work not only with charities, but with farmers, as well as scientists, and then most importantly, grocery stores, to look how we can address some of those issues with redistribution of surplus food. So I think it's really, you know, collaboration, you know, science doesn't go anywhere without collaboration. Simple as that.
Right. And again, I think, you know, Sophie, some of the conversations that we've had over the years and the work that you're doing around the sustainable ag strategy have really touched on the important role that research and development does play in building a more sustainable food system. But I want to build again on this theme around collaboration and working together. You talked about kind of the different silos within your division at Agriculture Canada, but Stephanie and Jack have both talked about those collaborations and partnerships. And I was wondering if you could just speak to kind of how you see that future playing out and what needs to happen to go further to build more of these collaborative partnerships that are going to get a more sustainable food system.
Yeah, well, we can start sort of at the umbrella level of sustainability. And I think those themes are the ones that we're trying to explore through the elaboration of the sustainable agriculture strategy, which will be meant to set a vision and the path forward for the sector and governments to take us to 2050 in our environmental objectives. And we know that there are some big themes of collaboration that need to occur, but they apply also more specifically to food loss and waste. And so one of the major ones is in measurement and data. I did note a comment in the Q&A earlier about sort of many players in the sector coming together to sort of design indexes. I think that what is happening right now in data and measurement is that because we're not quite there yet in terms of a national approach, not so much for international reporting, but for standardization of data and on-farm decision-making and access to programs and being able to use data to sort of demonstrate what progress has been done on a farm or another. Different parts of the sector and in academics and in governments are all sort of working on their own data solutions or approaches. And I think that there's a real need for us to come together to sort of set ourselves a national standard in that respect. So that's one area where collaboration really needs to occur. Beyond that, we've mentioned the science and the research and the innovation, but I think there's a role also for accelerators or incubators to really ensure that the results of the research are marketable and can be spread commercially. And then sort of on the food loss and waste topic specifically, I think that there's two types of collaborations that need to occur, and government may or may not have a role in that respect. But the first one is it's really hard to address food loss and waste if this whole supply chain is not around the same table. Otherwise, you end up addressing it in one part of the chain. Perhaps the costs can be passed up and down, and we really want to avoid that. The goal here is to save, to have every part of the chain save some money. And then finally, another form of collaboration would be at the local and community level, where more sort of less towards the loss end, but more towards the waste end. If you have surplus food, where is there a need? Who could use it? That knowledge is not always available in communities and at the local level, and you probably need to develop more sort of community style hubs or platforms to ensure that the information is out there. So those are examples.
Great, thank you, Sophie. And as much as these are, this is a really important concept, and reducing food loss and waste is something that should be one of these win-win situations. Jack, I'm going to come to you with this question first. There are barriers that are standing in the way of us making progress on it. And so a couple of questions have come in from the audience around what are the barriers that are standing in the way of farmers, feedlots using more byproducts. And so Jack, maybe we'll go to you first, and then Sophie and Stephanie to talk about the role that research and government play in reducing those regulatory barriers.
I'll maybe start off with one barrier, and it's maybe it's not political, but maybe the size of your feedlot or operation on whether you can handle some of those byproducts. There's kind of a sweet spot on it, no different than food sitting on the shelf. There's only so long that those byproducts can sit in our feed bunks or in our bunkers here waiting to be fed to the cattle. Would be one barrier. And then maybe more on the political side or the research side is there maybe hasn't been enough research done on certain food types or byproducts that we can actually feed and how much you can feed and how that affects the animals.
Great, thank you, Jack. And so Stephanie, again, I think we've got a very good understanding if we're feeding forages to cattle, what that nutritional profile looks like and what impact they have. Do we have a really good understanding of, as Jack mentions, all of these different types of byproducts that can be fed and how they work, and what are we doing to close that gap?
Yeah, so I think the feed that is already fed into feedlots has had an extreme amount of research conducted on it, that we almost don't recognize it as a byproduct anymore. We just consider that feed. But I think Jack raises a really interesting point that there is still a huge amount of byproducts that are not approved for feeding due to one reason or another. One example I have on the top of my head is hemp. So that's the production of hemp for fiber uses, and that as a part of that process is a byproduct of hemp seed screenings, hemp seed hulls. They are extremely nutritious for cattle, but of course there is concern due to the presence of some cannabinoids. So therefore there is some restrictions in feeding those types of products to cattle. So I think that's definitely one component of the research. And I have to compliment Dr. Rex Newkirk. He's really taken an active role in profiling what are some byproducts that are sitting out there that are not being fed to cattle. They're essentially getting composted or even burned because we don't actually have the current approval to feed those products. So I think he's really active in that area, and that's really important because those are kind of low-hanging fruit to be able to feed cattle, those types of feed types. On the other hand, is food waste, and that's when I talk about food waste, I'm more talking about the food that is going to the grocery store that for one reason or another is not getting sold to the customer. I'm not talking about once it goes to the consumer at a home, but rather still when it's fresh and it's viable, it just hasn't been sold and therefore has a use-by date. That is a much bigger area, and I would say it's very limited research in terms of how can we get that food waste that cannot be going to charities, of course, like that in that tier, that's obviously the number one. But how can we, whether through transport, through need, like Jack mentioned, feedlot size, the food that is coming in it's not consistent in terms of composition, in terms of volume. So all those questions are really important for research to answer and to work in collaboration with, for example, CFIA, as well as policy, and most importantly, farmers who are on the ground and know kind of some of these issues that they're working with. And most importantly, storage as well is something that there is renewed interest in seeing. Is there different ways that we can store this food waste through perhaps even silaging, so we can keep it in pits for a longer term, so therefore we can maybe combat some of these other issues that might arise from essentially having food coming into a farm and sitting there and not being able to fed anyway.
Great. Thank you. And so, Sophie, Jack's talked about some of those logistical issues that farmers face, for example, using it. Stephanie's talked about her research and development, but both have touched on, and our questions touched on, the regulatory barriers that are in place too. And I was wondering if you could just speak to kind of how you see that playing out. I know the feed regulations in Canada have been being worked on for a long time, but you know, how do we find the right balance in our regulations that create these enabling conditions that allow producers to get this food waste to their cattle, but play that kind of important role protecting the quality of the food system too?
Yeah, that's the eternal question, isn't it, on the nimbleness of our regulatory system, which is one of the best ones in the world, we're consistently told, but still maybe a little bit sluggish at times, or not keeping up with the most recent developments. And that's the eternal battle of the regulatory system. I think that there are many buckets of challenges that still need to be addressed in different measures. There are the regulatory restrictions, of course, that have to keep up with novel byproducts, different consumer demand, just evolving reality. We've talked about the logistics, but I think that just bringing it to a bit of a higher level, you need the ability to calculate whether the use of certain foods is economically viable in a food loss and waste system. So, you know, are the logistics, the transport, the handling, are they too cost prohibitive? And when do you sort of decide that it's just not worth your while economically? Sometimes I have a tendency to set up structures that then get used automatically, and we have to be careful about that. It might end up costing more than initially anticipated. I think that the economic viability is probably more achievable for food loss because you can have local systems that sort of utilize the byproducts of different farming operations, which is then sort of recycled into feed. Food waste is probably more difficult because you're looking at longer transportation times and different types of handling. I would say that a side challenge is communication with the public, because consumers have a tendency to understand food loss and waste more on the waste side of things. They really identify with saving money in the home and wasting less food, and they can see sort of it happening in supermarkets and in restaurants. But probably when we speak about cattle more specifically, the food loss part of the equation is probably more important in terms of overall impacts, and perhaps we need to sort of educate consumers on that. And then the ability to sort of calculate the overall environmental impact as well. It could, you know, food loss and waste systems could make sense from an economic standpoint, but ultimately they may not always equate to environmental benefits. And it might have been better to either compost or use biodigesters in certain cases, and sort of that environmental actuarial calculation needs to be done as well. And I would just like to plug in biodigesters here, because I know that is also in full swing of development, and, you know, perhaps less for beef cattle, but for the dairy industry, but also a very good example of a circular economy that can help us in our environmental objectives. Yeah,
and again, I think one of the benefits of cattle is that you don't need to build a biodigester to get that circularity. The cattle will do it themselves. But Jack, I mean, we talked about, again, some of those economics. You gave examples earlier around using the gluten from the kind of the corn syrup situation, but we saw dragon fruits in the video, and I was wondering if you could just maybe, are there other examples that you can point to of where people are finding that sweet spot, where there is kind of the economics to make it work, and And, do you see more of that being kind of the brewer's grain, or are we getting into more of the French fries and other more novel ways of making food loss and waste a reality for the beef industry?
Yeah, I think it was Sophie that pointed out the economical trigger point of is it viable distance wise for transport in, and that's one of the key things of Canada here. We have food production right across Canada, and we have beef production in every province. So it's a matter of linking those production losses of food waste up with those beef producers that can use those byproducts. And I always fall back to the examples of corn, because there's a lot of corn growing in southwestern Ontario here, and we have the ethanol plants. And even within the ethanol, I could give a couple of examples. So if you're a smaller producer, it's more viable for you to buy dry distillers, because the shelf life is indefinite when you bring it to your farm, where the wet distillers, basically you should be feeding it within 7 days to get the full benefit of the nutrient value out of it. So economy to scale, transportation costs in, because for one, you don't want to end up spending more than what your returns are coming back to you. So the old law of diminishing returns is definitely a factor in some of these scenarios where you're going to be using food loss byproducts.
And Jack, is it easy for producers to get information around to help them understand whether or not it makes sense from an economic or environmental perspective? Or again, is that one of those gaps out there that's potentially holding us back from doing more?
Well, a lot of that comes through your nutritionists and your feed suppliers that feedlots and beef producers use. There's a matter of doing some calculations, and most of those nutritionists have a good grasp on price points and the value of each byproduct when you use it in your rations.
Great, thank you. We've got a couple of questions again around kind of Sophie, picking up on your comments around what are the programs out there, and is this something that again government's thinking about around how can you do more in this space? I know you've had a food loss challenge, for example, that's been out, but I think that's really about exploring kind of new concepts or new ideas. But any thoughts about going further around programs, policies, or initiatives that incentivize cattle producers to do more to reduce food loss and waste?
Yeah, the food loss challenge was a way for the government to sort of incentivize the development of innovative business models or practices to spur sort of reducing the loss and waste, or preventing it, or certainly using the products or in an upcycling manner, or but that's a sort of like it's a precursor initiative, right, to sort of the bigger things that need to happen. And the government is sort of looking at the future in food loss and waste, and certainly there are some mandate letter commitments for some of our ministers in that area. We're really working hard to put forward some proposals, which we hope to see sort of come to life in the coming years under the food policy and with respect to food loss and waste. The ultimate goal, I would say, in response to the question, is to for the government to sort of support the elaboration of solutions, but not necessarily always be in the equation or be part of the mix. Meaning, we want to get beyond sort of the government programming, and the ideal would be for the supply chains to organize themselves initially, and to sort of have that calculation of where the points of food loss and waste are in the supply chain, how can they be fixed, and how can they be fixed to the benefit of the entire chain. And we believe that once that economic success becomes more obvious, the savings for for all points of the chain, right? Either in sort of like disposing of food that's not being utilized, or just cost of ingredients, that the system should organize itself to either prevent or utilize the food in a recycled manner. So role of government usually is to support and spur on the innovation with the hopes that things pick up on their own because they just make sense. And beyond that, I think there is a role for government in sort of setting possible targets for reduction of food loss and waste. We haven't done that yet in Canada, and establishing a better measuring system.
And so to wrap, as we wrap things up for the panelists just quickly, I think one of the things the video does is really tries to simplify what's a pretty complex situation, right? Where we're looking at a methane cycle, we're looking at this dynamic of different situations. Our conversation today has explored it. And I was wondering if you could all maybe just touch on kind of what is one of those simple takeaways from this discussion on food loss and waste that you'd like to leave people with? And Jack, maybe we'll start with you first.
Yeah, and I think I made this comment before that the food waste and the production of food byproducts, beef cattle can be the solution to the food waste problem.
Great, thank you, Jack. Stephanie, your thoughts on a kind of a simple takeaway on food loss and waste?
Yeah, so complex issue, and I think it involves a lot of different solutions because every type of food loss or food waste is dynamic and different. I think that the beef cattle or ruminant systems are really well poised to address this issue and have a significant impact on coming up with a variety of different solutions as it is, as well as all different alternatives that we can do to further improve the issue.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. And Sophie, your takeaway on the topic?
Yeah, I think there's no debate that a significant portion of methane emissions in Canada are due to sort of landfills being full of food that was never utilized, and that was the cheapest solution at the time, was to dump it in a landfill, and that anything is better than that in sort of in the pyramid of solutions. And therefore, I think it's to a great benefit that the cattle industry participate in this cycle and helping develop new solutions in the context of food loss and waste. And again, I mean, my biggest takeaway every time we talk about food loss and waste in other environmental or sustainability solutions in respect to agriculture, there's always that fine dance of, well, it makes sense from an environmental standpoint, but does it make sense for the producer from an economic standpoint? That's not always clear. But in the context of food loss and waste, it is pretty clear that there are social benefits, potential profitability, or economic benefits for producers, but of course, always environmental benefits as well.
Great, thank you. And Sophie, that thought about the triple bottom line benefits of reducing food loss and waste and cattle's role in it is, I think, a pretty good note to end on. So thank you very much to our panelists. And Nathan, I will hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Tyler. Thank you, panelists, for the fruitful discussion, and Tyler, again, to you for moderating that. We're nearing the end of our agenda, but before we close out, we have one more speaker that I'd like to hand the mic over to, and that's Catherine Grenier. She's president of and CEO of the Nature Conservancy of Canada. Catherine joined NCC as its president and CEO in 2020. Prior to NCC, Grenier served as vice president for National Parks Operation with CPAC and held senior roles with Parks Canada. Her work in protected areas has been recognized with several awards, including Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medal in 2012. Thanks for being here today. Catherine, take it away.
Thank you very much, Nathan, and thank you very much to all panelists for a very fruitful conversation. It was great to see Environment Climate Change Canada, as well as Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada on the call, as well as our key partners, Ducks Unlimited, and thank you very much for the Canadian Cattlemen Association for hosting this. A lot has been said about the links between climate, nature, and agriculture, and I think the challenge before us is very clear. We need to protect what remain of Canada's grassland to help us address the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. And I'm sure everybody that's watching today probably shares my feeling that I'm encouraged by the commitment, the knowledge, and the passion that's been gathered virtually with us here today. And I think what I'm seeing through all of the conversation is how everybody is uniquely positioned to make important contribution to this goal. So throughout my career with nature, and certainly in my work with the Nature Conservancy of Canada, my appreciation for the magic and critical importance of grassland has grown and crystallized. Coming from the east, I wasn't aware of all the importance of the grassland, and more now it's clear how the planet needs grassland and we need to conserve what's left of it. I think, although how it was mentioned, and Tom mentioned this, it's still a bit of an unsung hero. And although there's been a lot of progress, I still think too few Canadians are aware of the importance, and that it's Canada's most threatened ecosystem. And that only by working together can we make it happen. So I just wanted to share that I had the chance to visit again the great McIntyre Ranch that Tom talked about earlier today, and spend time with Ralph Trawle III, whose family has cared for the land for generations. And you can see a picture right behind me. The land is stunning, and standing on this unique landscape and appreciating its scale and really truly the impact it has. And also hearing the Trawle's family's commitment for caring for this land and its ranching operations, and the pride and enthusiasm they have for the collaboration they've created with the conservation community to ensure it remains intact and cared forever, it gives me real hope that there is a way. So as Tom mentioned earlier, this 130-year-old ranch is one of the largest private land holding in Canada, spanning over 22,000 hectares in an area that's more than a quarter of the size of the city of Calgary. And our collaboration with the Trawle family, the McIntyre Ranch, and Ducks Unlimited Canada is a powerful reminder of the collective effort required to create impact. Over 20 years of dialogue has led to this historic conservation project. And it's only happened because of the dedicated commitment and efforts of Canadians from all corners of society who wants to ensure that there is a future for these important grasslands. And these people are a motivated ranching family with shared values, a really important partnership with Ducks Unlimited Canada and the Nature Conservancy of Canada, significant investment from the Government of Canada and the province of Alberta, support from foundations like the Weston Family Foundation and private corporation, and hundreds of private donors. So the reason I'm talking about McIntyre Ranch is also that it's among many ranching operations across Canada that's currently conducting successful business and conserving the country's nature. Through the power of conservation agreements, these operations are stewarding hundreds of thousands of hectares of grassland across the country. And they are proof that Canada's sustainable ranching practices are very much aligned with our country's conservation goals, and that conservation and industry can work productively hand in hand. And I think through the conversation today, we saw that on many occasions. So today's collaboration between Ducks Unlimited Canada, the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, and the Nature Conservancy of Canada is another great example of how we can and really need to come together if we're going to ensure profitable business, prevent biodiversity loss, counter climate change, and achieve our country's conservation goal. There's no question that all of society needs to do more to ensure the future of Canada's grassland and a resilient future. It will take all of us at the table to make sure that that happens. NCC is thankful for supporting partners who share our interest in conserving grassland. And as the momentum builds towards COP28, let's remember the unique position that Canada is to make a meaningful and lasting contribution to tackling climate change and biodiversity loss. Thank you very much to everyone. Back to you, Nathan.
Thanks, Catherine. Okay, just to wrap up, I'd like to reiterate, what I've heard sitting here from the panelists and the speakers today, and our two videos is we've been challenged, to protect biodiversity, to help sequester carbon, to help battle food waste. All of those are achievable, as we've seen here today, through supporting and building off of our beef farmers and ranchers. And the common denominator to all of that success is having cattle on the landscape. So I guess what we've been saying all along, to our policymakers, to our trading partners, is believe in the science, believe in the research. We are doing it as well or better than anybody in Canada. You know, and doing everything that we've been asked to do, we're doing it at half of the world's average of GHG emissions. So easily said, what the world needs to, if we're serious about correcting this global issue, is we need more Canadian cattle on the landscape, not less of them. That concludes today's webinar. I'd like to thank everybody for attending today's discussion. The recording will be made available later this week on CCA YouTube page, and it will be emailed out to everyone who registered. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day.